All right, I think we're happy to begin. We have 1 hour together. Welcome, everyone, to the Maryknoll Office for Global Concerns webinar on COP28, Outcomes and Next Steps. Thanks so much for making time to be with us today. We're broadcasting from Washington, D.C., and one of our panelists from Baltimore, Maryland. So I would like to begin our time together with a short prayer, just to center us on what brings us to this work today, which is our mission to care for God's creation. So if y'all just take a deep breath, I'm going to read a prayer by Chief Yellowlark of the Lakota Native American. O great Spirit, whose voice I hear in the winds and whose breath gives life to all the world, hear me. I am small and weak. I need your strength and wisdom. Let me walk in beauty and make my eyes ever behold the red and purple sunset. Make my hands respect the things you have made and my ears sharp to hear your voice. Make me wise so I may understand the things you have taught my people. Let me learn the lessons you have hidden in every leaf and rock. I seek strength, not to be superior to my brother, but to fight my greatest enemy, myself. Make me always ready to come to you with clean hands and straight eyes, so when life fades as the fading sunset, my spirit will come to you without shame. Amen. I'm very excited to have today with me three fantastic speakers and also colleagues, all three who were recently at the UN Climate Change Conference in Dubai, known as COP28. And we're here to hear about their experience, what decisions were made that we should be aware of, and possible next steps that we can take. Let me introduce them. First, we will hear from Lisa Sullivan. Lisa is a returned Maryknoll missioner who served with her family in Bolivia and Venezuela for more than 20 years as a community organizer, and most recently during the hunger years in Venezuela, teaching farming and food production to children and local families. When she returned to the United States, we were thrilled to have her join our staff in Washington, D.C. as our senior program officer on integral ecology. And with her is Sister Susan Nchubiri. We call her Susanna because we have two Susans in the office. It gets confusing. Well, Susanna, as originally from Kenya, a Maryknoll sister, she has served in Hong Kong, prison ministry, and pastoral care to students, and in Haiti as a community organizer, and now in Washington, D.C. as a program associate supporting our programs, particularly on Haiti and U.S. welcome of refugees and migrants. She also served in Jerusalem as an ecumenical accompanier, so she's very much involved in our work for peace, particularly now with the Israel-Hamas war. She accompanied Lisa to COP28 and will share about her experience as well. And our third speaker, Gina Castillo, joins us from Catholic Relief Service in Baltimore, Maryland. Now, Gina leads CRS's global policy work on climate change. And before joining CRS, she worked at Oxfam America for 11 years, where she started their climate adaptation work and accompanied various positions. And then prior to Oxfam America, she works for Oxfam Novid on food security, agriculture, and livelihoods based at The Hague. So we're very excited to have all three of you here today. And without further ado, I invite Sister Susanna to share the experience of what was it like to be at COP28.
Thank you, Susan, for that wonderful introduction to all of us. And I'm really happy to be here today to share with you a little bit of my experience at COP. For Lisa and I, it was our first COP. And also it was our first time in Dubai. At the airport, we were all participants were given a SIM card with like 1 GB of data, because you could not text, but you could use it for WhatsApp and to get on the internet. At the COP and during registration, we were also given a Metro card that we could use to travel around to the venue where the COP was taking place at the Dubai Expo 2020. I mean, the city is very clean, the metro very efficient. I mean, public transportation is very efficient. The place is filled with skyscrapers, highways, and cars. And again, I mean, COP had registered about 110,000 people, but it's like 84,000 went to the COP. On site, went on site. Others were on Zoom, on webinars. So for me, when we arrived the second day. So we had the announcement that COP and adopted the loss and damage, that it was going to be operational. So that kind of gave me a naive optimism, because usually I'm quite skeptical of big conferences and the declarations that are made there. But this time I was like, oh, this is going to be good. And I was actually interviewed by an Australian member of SIDSE group, the Catholic Actors, and he is a member of Caritas Australia. And I said to the people of Australia that, yeah, this COP is going to be, it's going to be different. Why did I say so? Because first, there were a lot of young people present. There were a lot of women. There were quite a big representation of indigenous peoples and peoples from the low-lying highlands. So with that, I said, well, this is going to be really, really, really different. And also, there were a lot of climate justice and human rights activists around COP. And there was a lot of action. Really, every day there was not less than 10 and different climate and human rights actions or protests taking place, reminding the negotiators at COP that human rights, climate justice are all intertwined. However, as the meetings went on, I began to get a bit disappointed and a bit disillusioned. Why? Again, we know COP was held in Dubai. The president of COP is an executive director of one of Emirates' biggest oil companies. So, I mean, for a COP that was geared into talking about phasing out fossil fuels, was a bit of a contradiction. Also, on the fourth day at COP, it was reported that the president had spoken with Mary Robinson of Ireland and said that there's no science to back the claim that phasing out fossil fuels will keep the temperatures below 1.5. So there was a lot that kind of riled up everybody, and every meeting after that, whenever he spoke, he was talking about science. There is science, like, just to control the damage. The other thing that made it made me feel discomfort was there were a lot of oil companies, executives, and private sector people at COP. You hear there were 84,000 people on site. And many of these were, of course, executive of companies that are trying to sell their products and to advocate for themselves. So although this COP and tried very hard to be inclusive, that inclusion had its own downside as well, because that then kind of drowned the voices of the women, of the youth, of the low-lying islands that were there. Although many of the young people and women were panelists at so many of the events that I attended, and their cry was, we don't want to be used as props for PR. We want our voices to be heard. We are not here for show. We want you to hear us and know that we know what it is that needs to be done for us to reverse the damage that has been caused to our lands, to our environment, to our lives. So there was a fun part of it too, though we never were able to do much of sightseeing in Dubai. But our days were like 12-hour day work. There was so much to do. There were so many things to attend. And one thing I learned is that next time, if ever I go to a COP, I need just to focus on one area, follow just one area, because there were so many really interesting things to attend and to learn from. But in the end, it was you learn one thing here, another thing there, but following one would have been much more meaningful for me. So the fun part, every day the activists would select a country that won the fossil of the day. That is a country that is a big polluter, is not supportive of phasing out fossil fuels. Unfortunately, the US won at least twice that I can recall. So US with this symbiotic twin, Israel, won a few times because of what it's doing to climate and to human rights. The activism of the youth was also very, very powerful. I remember when we had the COP plenary and the COP presidency was speaking, a little girl, 16-year-old, jumped on the stage and disrupted. And she said, you just have to make decisions that are just. You can't continue talking and not making decisions that will save my people. My people are drowning. My people are dying. So she is just a little girl, and it took 3 men, 3 security people to get her out of on stage. And of course, people clapped for her. How she had managed to sneak in with with the poster, I don't know. And it must have been folded and in her backpack when she walked in. So yeah, and a lot of people risking their lives, putting their lives online to push for climate justice and for human rights. I also know that there was a lot of awareness of what is happening in Gaza and Palestine. So we had, like every day there was an event that was in solidarity with Palestine. But there were 2 big ones. And the last one was like thousands, the march for solidarity. That march was like thousands of participants took part in that march. And yeah, so it was just showing the world that no climate justice can happen without human rights as well. So they are all intertwined. So I will not talk a lot more, but I would say I left feeling like the last day, because of activism, the last evening, I also took part in holding the line to pressure the conference, the negotiators, to come with a strong voice, text that guided governments on how to phase out. Although the outcome was not that strong, but at least the fossil fuel words got back into text because it had been taken out, deleted by the text that had come out on the 12th during the day before night. So they worked an extra day because of activism. So that was one thing that was quite impressive. So I left feeling a bit feeling that there is a lot of work to be done to educate and to advocate for climate, for human rights, for accountability and responsibility. And also that, yes, I was skeptical about big meetings. However, the declarations that are made, the agreements that are made will help us to do more advocacy, because we can call out governments or corporations and say, you agreed on this, this was agreed on, that you have to follow. And so I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you, Susanna. I just want to point out to everyone listening, feel free to write questions in the Q&A that you should see at the bottom of your screen. You can click on Q&A and write a question, and we'll have a good chunk of time to address those after our speakers finish. So now I turn to Lisa and ask you to give us some details about what happened outcome-wise.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Susanna. It was amazing to be there with you. I never would have made it without you, I can guarantee. As she said, they were long, long days, 12-hour days, but as long as we had our coffee, we would start every day saying, let's divide and conquer. So yeah, I'll share a little bit to begin with, as Susanna did a little bit, just kind of the flavor of things that really marked what then occurred. As she mentioned, it was a very bizarre backdrop for having a conference about the planet. It was hard to find any sign of nature. There were plenty of skyscrapers. You would go past oil storages on the way to the venue where COP was held. And of course, the fact that the oil executive of the UAE, one of the biggest oil exporters in the world, was the president of COP. Of course, he would say that poised him uniquely to be able to dialogue with other oil-producing countries. And whether we like it or not, at COP, all countries must come to the table, not just those who, are already working for reducing fossil fuels, but the producers of fossil fuels themselves. And so, who knows in the end, people can judge whether that was a good or bad thing. But that was the very odd venue we had. Every day was filled with smog. It was a reminder we were in a hurry. So this is just a photo of the very proper people, the leaders. That was the kind of the face of COP, right? The gathering at the beginning, kings and princes and all sorts of heads of state were there. That's, again, kind of the public face of COP. But as Susanna said, I think this is really the face of the COP that I experienced, the enormous passion of so many climate activists, so many, I would say the majority from the global South. And just so their passion there, but behind that is a passion of years spent of struggles in their own countries. And so that was so perceived. And once again, as Susanna said, there was 2,456 lobbyists from the oil companies, about triple than ever before. But then I was there and Susanna were there. We were one of 84,000. As you see on my little tag, it says not paid for by the fossil fuel companies. So obviously the majority were not paid by them, but it obviously has a huge impact. Also present were, of course, not only politicians, but the teams, each of the government's teams, negotiating teams. And the US team is led, of course, by John Kerry. I put in this picture also a woman named Christina Chan, who is the lead. The State Department team has many experts, and she was the one negotiating what's called the Loss and Damage Treaty. And so we had a lot of interaction with her in the past year and during COP as well. Also a picture of Senator Schatz from Hawaii, because there were 30 senators and congressmen present at COP. But this is, again, I think the real face of what really moves the decisions in the long run at COP. It is those who are passionate, who are feeling, who are on the front lines. And it was really extraordinary, the presence of youth, the presence of indigenous, the presence of fossil fuel activists, such as this young woman on the top. And there were just, their voices were so powerful. And again, it may not be the decision that happens that COP, but the decisions we do come to eventually are because of that passion, that pushing. Also very present were faith organizations. For the first time, there was a faith pavilion. It was in the center of this huge venue. So side events took place there as well. And they'd had a previous meeting about a month before COP, and they all signed kind of an agreement and being behind, the need to changes that are necessary to stop climate change. And this is a picture of Pope Francis signing that agreement. There's Susanna giving a presentation at the Faith Pavilion. And it was also for us as a Catholic organization, really interesting to see the presence of the Vatican, the Holy See delegation, the smallest, the newest delegation to COP. They are now full parties, not just observers, but they have the biggest expanse of the globe, really. So it's a really odd, difference between numbers of actual people that they have in the Holy See, but how much they represent worldwide. To the left is the nuncio to the UAE. He spoke at one of our side panels. And there's Susanna with Musamba, who's one of the Holy See representatives delegation. And then to the right is I'm not sure if you can see it because I'm not seeing it myself. Is Pope Francis. That's actually a statue of him because he was unable to come because he was ill, but his very powerful words were read by the Secretary of State. But somebody actually brought a placard, brought it there. I think Gina told me about it, but the security had to take it away. So, but he was very present in spirit. So many things are happening simultaneously at COP, and this is just kind of giving you a flavor. There's, of course, the central part is the negotiations. The upper right, there's forums in the bottom right there, and to the left is all that action of the protest and the side events. The side events really are an extraordinary opportunity to delve into climate issues. And we, for example, Maryknoll hosted a side event. And to even get to host a side event, you have to then merge with another set of organizations and then re-merge again. And so we ended up merging with about 5 organizations from 5 countries just to present our side event. So you can see the dialogue that happens even leading to one side event, and there were hundreds of them. And so it's a real opportunity to really delve into climate issues. As Susanna mentioned, the first day we started off with the victory. It was a victory. The Loss and Damage Fund is something that had been it seemed impossible just a few years ago, but again, because of that activism at the base, people demanding that countries who've already experienced the effects of climate change, which they have done almost nothing to contribute to, must receive financial help in rebuilding. And so after a year of dialogue, what was called the Transition Committee, they came up with a formula of what they thought it should look like. And on day 1, it was approved. So that set, as Susanna said, things on positive footing. And there's Susanna presenting. Maryknoll and other groups were very strong in backing a faith letter in promoting a loss and damage fund that's truly accessible to vulnerable communities. So there she is presenting that at a press conference. But there I put, after day 1 was a victory, well, days 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 were pretty much, I felt the energy was going one way. The energy was on the issue of fossil fuel phase out. And wherever you went, wherever you turned the corner, that was the push. Because believe it or not, after 27 COPs, the main culprit of climate change had never explicitly been called out. And so there was the call to have call for fossil fuel phase out now. During this COP, something that was really important was that the global stocktake was presented. This is the midway point from the Paris agreements, when countries could set out their what they call their NDCs, their national determined contributions to keep warming to 1.5 degrees. And so the real focus was to try to have a wording of the global stocktake that really responds to what we must do to get on track again to keep 1.5 alive. So again, this concept of hold the line, end fossil fuels, turn the ship around. So in this graphic, I think what I'm trying to show is the debate that took place among countries. To the left, you have the minister of Tuvalu, a Pacific Island country that were really pushing for phasing out fossil fuels. Obviously, they're going to disappear if fossil fuels are not phased out. But 130 countries went in asking for a fossil fuel phase out. And that was very much blocked by the OPEC, the oil producing countries. And so you had this dilemma. Would this happen? Would fossil fuels finally be called out? Would they be blocked by the oil countries, such as the UAE itself? So many people were calling for a fast, funded, forever, feminist phase out. That was kind of the ring throughout the venues. And in the end, at the 11th or 12th or 13th hour, whatever you want to call it, the decision was there was going to be a call for transition from. So that verb is different than phase out, transition from. But it was something in that it mentioned fossil fuels. And so there's the feeling that this is turning the ship somewhat, beginning to turn the ship around. The other really remarkable result was there was a call for tripling renewables and doubling energy efficiency. And again, the reason I have this picture of these young people is that, again, if it weren't for so many people through so many years pushing for these things, these wouldn't be a final decision. This is a slide kind of showing some other wins. There was a pretty good call for halting deforestation. For the first time, the transport sector was specifically called into view, promoting EVs. To the left is food systems. Food systems were mentioned. Food systems contribute 30% of greenhouse gas emissions. But in the final roll call, there was a lot missing, but at least they were named. Biodiversity is one of the things I have there, and methane. These are other agreements that were also positive outcomes. Here is what we were missing, right? So in spite of calling out fossil fuels, there was a nod to transitional fuels such as liquefied natural gas. There was, and I put agro, there was not really acknowledgement of agro industry. There was a nod to carbon technologies like carbon capture, which are so expensive and unproven and allow, the fossil fuel producers to keep on doing their thing. There was not recognition really of the mining, which will happen if we do transition completely to renewables. We need to transition our lifestyles, and we all know that. There was some acknowledgement of indigenous peoples, but the money was not acknowledged where that's needed, nor their free, prior, informed consent when their lands are used for mining. And perhaps the biggest worry is that while many countries were in agreement, supposedly, with transitioning from fossil fuels, meanwhile, we're ratcheting up our production, and specifically the U.S. Has a plan to 20 times more increase the export of LNG, liquefied natural gas. I'll mention this at the end because we'll close with some actions. But the big question, of course, to all of making all of this happen is that of money. It's very unclear. Some countries committed to certain things, committed some to the loss and damage fund, not nearly enough. The issue of debt is really standing in the way of countries being able to transition, lesser developed countries being able to transition out of fossil fuels. And so that issue of where the money is coming from and how to push for that looms very large. And finally, the decision was made, was not announced until I think it was the time we were during COP28, where COP29 would be. It was an argument because it needs to be in Eastern Europe, and Russia was blocking almost all of the possibilities until Azerbaijan was willing to take it on. So that's where it will be in COP29. But COP30, there's a lot of energy towards COP30, which will be in the Amazon. It'll be in Belém, Brazil. And that is when the new plan of each country, the countries has to write their own plan called their NDCs, their national determined contributions. And so based on this new global stocktake, this new measuring of where we're at, they have to write new NDCs, and those will have to be presented at COP30, their new NDCs for 2030. And I'll end right here. This is Susanna. I left COP with this image. We left at night the day before things ended. And many people form the word Yala. I'm not sure if that's how you spell it, but which I guess is let's do it. Let's move on
Yes,
it.
it is. It
Thank
is.
you, thank you. It was beautiful. It was pitch dark, and they had these balloons, and they made a human formation of that word. We left not knowing what would happen. We left, it looked like nothing was going to be spelled out in terms of fossil fuels. But I just sensed that power, the power of the people. I really did, and sensed the prayers of so many of you. And so, sure enough, during the night, the next day, things turned around, and the results were quite, not perfect, but quite historic with regard to fossil fuel. And just leave here the word agonize or organize. Yesterday, I was on a call with mostly young people from the global South who'd been at COP. And it was really beautiful hearing their testimonies. And while they were not at all seeing the results were perfect, they were so empowered to be global actors and so empowered to go back. And so, they said, we can agonize or we could organize. And so I just want to leave on that, on their recommendation. Yeah, so that's it.
Beautiful. Thank you, Lisa. Why don't you go ahead
Yeah,
and
unshare my screen,
unshare your
yes.
screen.
Mhm.
Right. See. Here we go. We flew back to the main screen. Again, I want to remind people you can go ahead and write questions in the Q&A. There are quite a few in there, and we will try our best to get through them. But first, I want to welcome Gina from Catholic Relief Service to share about her experience at COP28 as well. And in particular, what were the shortcomings that I know Lisa was naming some of them, but with your expertise, we'd love to hear from you as well.
Sure, thank you. I think people think of COP as maybe this one event, but you can actually attend COP and have different experiences. Like it's like 5 mini COPs within one COP. And so what I followed were more the official negotiations. So I spent a lot of time following the global goal on adaptation, a bit of the global stocktake, and then a bit of the discussions on the Sharm el-Sheikh work program on agriculture.
Gina, would you like me to share your slides, or would
Yes,
you?
please.
Okay.
Yes.
All right.
And I'll just start with some reflections on the global stocktake to pick up on Lisa while you're setting up. I think the global stocktake was probably the most important outcome of this COP, just because, as Lisa said, it's kind of like this report card on the Paris Agreement and tells us how we're doing. So that was like the big decision. And Lisa went over the key things. I just want to mention on the debt and climate. I think the global stocktake, for the very first time, you have within the UNFCCC a recognition of the importance of of reforming the finance architecture so that countries have more of that fiscal space. So it recognizes the progress right now that is happening within the World Bank, but that more is needed. So there's a real nod to the need for financial reform, which I think is really important and something that I know as faith actors we care about. I'm just going to talk a little bit about the global goal on adaptation. I think adaptation continues to be that kind of middle child that's a bit neglected, even though adaptation is critical to developing countries. We can advance. Next slide. So for those of you who don't know, the global goal on adaptation, it's established within the Paris Agreement, Article 7.1, with the aim to enhance adaptive capacity, strengthen resilience, and reduce vulnerability to climate change. At COP26 in Glasgow, they established the GLASS, that's the short form, the Glasgow Sharm el-Sheikh Work Program on the GGA, which is the acronym. So for the last 2 years, there have been a series of workshops to think about, like, what does this global goal on adaptation, how do we operationalize it? And the agreement was always to create a framework to implement this global goal on adaptation. So parties have been coming together, working. I've been following some of this online. I was in Bonn, where again, there was discussions on the global goal on adaptation. Next slide. At this COP28, what we wanted to see was this framework. And while I will speak for myself, I always think I know what a framework is. And I think I've been working on adaptation for about 15 years, but not within the UNFCCC policy space. And that's like a totally its own world, where, you know, at every meeting, there's like discussions on what are we talking about? What is this framework? Is it a framework or is it not a framework? Do we need a roadmap? Is a roadmap part of a framework, etc.? At this COP, there was very little progress on the first week. So this is when negotiators come together and they hash out the text that is then going to go to the ministers for their final agreement. They were unable to reach any type of consensus. The debate was acrimonious at times. People didn't like the draft. The co-facilitators, Sweden and Belize, who were chairing the GGA, they proposed a text. While everybody could agree that there were deficiencies in the text, at the end of the day, they felt that this text was not did not represent the views of the parties, and so it couldn't go to the ministers. So the GGA was taken up at the ministerial level. President Nchubiri proposed that pairs of negotiators would lead consultations. And so Chile and Australia, the ministers of environment, worked with the chairs of Sweden and Belize to have further discussions and produce something. So next slide. So, I mean, for the last 2 years, there was some kind of progress. So parties agreed that the global goal on adaptation would contain these dimensions of the cycle. So those of you who work on adaptation, you'll know that all these dimensions are part of the adaptation cycle, the importance of doing impact, vulnerability and risk assessment, the planning, the implementation, and the monitoring, evaluation, and learning. That was agreed upon, I would say. And then, of course, that you would have themes and sectors, and the themes or the sectors, there was never agreement on the right word to use. All of these come from the IPCC. So these were, you know, going into COP28, there was just broad agreement that the framework would have these elements. Next slide. And that there would be cross-cutting considerations, like that it be country-driven, participatory, that it take into account local knowledge, indigenous knowledge, that it be gender responsive, etc. Those, again, were areas of agreement. Next slide. Where you had parties diverge, and this, you know, kind of was just highlighted at COP28, was on the inclusion of the principle of the Convention and Paris Agreement, the common but differentiated responsibilities and respective capacities, the need for overarching targets, developing countries, AOASIS, which is the Alliance of Small Island States, G77 plus China. They all wanted to see some kind of overarching targets. The US was against targets. The EU could consider targets. The UK as well, they could consider targets. And then, of course, the means of implementation, which particularly reference to, obviously, finance. We know that there is a gap, that more money goes to mitigation than adaptation. So those discussions were often pushed back by developed countries, saying that finance is not to be discussed within the GGA, that that's going to be discussed in the Standing Committee on Finance, or the committee that looks at long-term finance, but it was not a discussion within the GGA. So on December 13th, early morning, there was a revised draft decision was available. So I was getting ready to leave Dubai and checking my phone to see if there was a new text. We were promised a text on the 12th, I believe, if my memory serves me right. That didn't come. It was 6 o'clock. It didn't come. I think I boarded my plane around 7:30 or so. And before I boarded, I saw that a new text had been released. And so next slide. And so what was the decision? So COP28 decided to adopt what they're calling this UAE framework for global resilience. Paragraph 7 of the COP28 decision says that they decide that the purpose of this UAE framework for global climate resilience is to guide the achievement of the global goal on adaptation and the review of overall progress in achieving it, with a view to reducing the increasing adverse impacts, risks, and vulnerabilities, etc. Next slide. And then, of course, they go over all the sectors or themes. I'm not going to read these using language that is not target. And I think if we were to submit any proposal using this kind of language, we would be told by a potential donor that we needed to really have some smart targets. So they talk about significantly reducing water-induced water scarcity. Food and ag is there, health, ecosystems and biodiversity, etc. Next slide, please. Infrastructure, social protection, and cultural heritage. All these themes and sectors are part of the COP28 decision. Next slide. And of course, they adopted the use of these dimensions of the adaptations cycle. And within all of these dimensions, there are specific targets. For example, when it comes to impact, vulnerability, and risk assessment, there's a target that by 2030, all parties have conducted up-to-date assessments of climate hazards. The same thing with planning, that by 2030, all parties have the national adaptation plans or some kind of policy instrument at the national level that is gender responsive, participatory, etc. So for all those dimensions, there are specific targets. Next slide. So when assessing the GGA outcomes, the text recognizes that means of adaptation for means of, I think that's the error there, that finance, technology transfer, and capacity building are crucial. So that's recognized. They call for, there's a call for urging developed country parties to at least double their collective provision of climate finance for adaptation from 2019 levels by 2025. They launched a 2-year work program on indicators and potential quantified elements for those targets. So there's a reference that potentially you can get to some kind of quantified targets. There's obviously no roadmap for increasing funding for adaptation. At the end of the day, I think developing countries were really disappointed with the outcomes of the GGA. And yeah, I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, Gina. Oh, I'm really left with the impression about it's where the rubber meets the road now. We've had so many COPs. And the focus, like we know we need to get from point A to point B, but how we do it is climate finance. And finance is a fancy word for money, who's going to pay for it. So I recognize that, and I recognize also what Susanna spoke about, human rights and centering, being inclusive, and centering the most vulnerable in this climate crisis. I want to try to take a stab at the questions that have come in. We have nearly 30 questions and just over 15 minutes to go over them. But I want to start with the first. And Susanna, if you're there, if you could turn your camera on. This question is addressed to you as a religious sister. Its question was the first question to come in. It was from a fellow woman religious asking, what is ours to do now as Catholic actors? What would you like or would you recommend as a Catholic sister?
All right, I am trying to answer that by text, but anyway, I think one thing that we could do is advocacy. As I said earlier, those people who were advocating every day, their voices did not go in vain, though they were not completely heard, but at least something happened because of the presence of activism, and not only but advocating for the rights. So for us religious in particular, we need to be in the forefront of protecting the rights of others, especially the most vulnerable, because they are the ones who suffer more advancedly from climate change. And Pope Francis actually, in his address that was read by the Vatican Secretary of State, Cardinal Paolini, he said that our failure to protect the environment is a structural sin. It's a sin, and it's a structural sin that affects mostly the most vulnerable. And also it's going to cause generational conflict, because people won't be rising up to ask for their rights, and it's going to be causing conflict all around the world. So we need to address that. So advocacy, educating people about their rights and what the choices we make about climate do to other people, to ourselves, to other people, and to the environment. Because some people may not know, some know, maybe others don't, but trying to use the knowledge we have to educate. So educate, advocate, and also act if there is any action towards climate. Like we have this Willow pipeline. Have we been able to stand with the people who are saying this is polluting our water, this is polluting our land, this is, if there's a leakage, we will be the ones suffering. And liquid natural gas is being, in quotes, being told it's safe. It isn't safe. It's not safe. It's not green. So, but that is causing a lot of adverse effects on the people where it passes. So for us, it's to educate, advocate, and act.
Beautiful, thank you. This next question is for Gina. Just want to clarify about the GGA framework. You're saying it was adopted, but developing countries were left disappointed.
Yes.
So the question is, what's next for you in your position to help developing countries now deal with this this disappointing framework?
Yeah, that's a great question. That's still part of our internal reflection. As I said, I'm continuously mindful of the fact that at every COP in the last couple of years, adaptation continues to get sidelined. So at last year's COP, it was all about the loss and damage fund. And as civil society organizations, at one point we were, somebody pointed the finger at us and said, why aren't you guys talking more about adaptation? Because if we don't adapt, there's going to be more losses and damages. You should be talking more about losses and damages. It seems to me that this is my own personal reflection, that in the movement as civil society organizations, we get locked into pushing one or two things. So it's loss and damage. This year it was about the global stock take, and it was because that was the most important decision. And so how do we continue to beat the drum on the importance of adaptation? I don't know. I don't have a simple question. It's the question that keeps me up at night because it's critical to the work that CRS does, So how do we continue to, at the global level, advance so that more money, like that, at the end of the day, it's about driving more climate finance to adaptation. How do we support that? So yeah, I don't have a very complete answer. It's work in progress in my thinking.
Well, I think that demonstrates to us how difficult it is to actually bring the nations of the globe together and work together. So thank you for sticking in it all these years. CRS is lucky to have you. The next question, I have two questions for Lisa. First, you spoke of a good rapport with representatives, US representatives, US delegates, and you mentioned someone from the State Department. Can you say more about that? Just tell us more about your personal opinion. How is this crew from the US delegation? Should we feel good about it? And what is it that we as US voters should be aware of? And second, you spoke about transition to fossil fuels. What exactly does that transition mean? What does that look like? Can you give an example?
Yeah. The US team, as we know, is led by John Kerry. And I would say, honestly, for the most part, these people really are passionate about, attacking climate change. And I think many times in the right ways. Of course, they're also have the power of fossil fuel industry. They have to deal with Republicans back home who are likely to vote out a lot of the things that they try to promote. And so they're between a rock and a hard place. But I would say that I found the team very open, I'd say, especially particularly to faith groups. We met with them throughout the year. We met Christina Chan would immediately respond to my emails. She would respond to having lengthy meetings. She was willing to appear at some of our events. Things got sidetracked. But so I feel like there's an open door to listen. And I feel like that's really sincere. And so we need to keep knocking on those doors, absolutely keep knocking on those doors. And I do think, there's a way to have them open. And I also think the reason I put the picture of Senator Schatz, there are things that are actually happening, not just at this international level, but at the national level, such as the Forest Act, which he's sponsoring, which is finally has been introduced in bicameral, bipartisan. I'll put that in the chat afterwards that we can do about that. But so I think in addition to knocking on the door of the State Department, the climate team, also there's many senators and representatives who really do have this at heart. The big question, what does transition from fossil fuels mean? Well, first of all, again, we need to grasp that this was accepted, that it is fossil fuels that have caused this sinking ship, this overheating planet. And to transition from, and again, they mentioned just certain sectors of energy systems in it, but we need to eventually, obviously, transition completely away from fossil fuels. We really can't. The main concept is to not expand production. So tomorrow we're not going to all have to turn off our lights and have to find ways to heat our homes by solar. We have to make that. That's obviously, it takes a while, but the most important thing is to not expand even more projects. And so that's why at the end, I'll put an action alert about that, because the US was talking out of two sides of its mouth, really. On one hand, it was part of the team of countries calling for some kind of a phase out. Amazingly, they were perhaps some of the actors that pulled the two sides together. They played an interesting role. I'll acknowledge that. But on the other hand, the Biden administration is mega promoting mega expansion of liquefied natural gas exports, and so export plants, which will just make it impossible for us to keep to 1.5. So again, the transition from fossil fuels has to happen equitably. Countries such as the US, developed countries, we have alternatives. We have ways of introducing renewables lesser developed countries, they are to be given more time. They barely have contributed to this. And so there's a whole scale of equity who would start first, who would do it faster, who would help fund the others. And so it's a complex scheme. But a lot has been written how that could happen.
Can I just chime in there because there was also an interesting article on The Guardian that I put in the chat about just this question about what does it mean to transition? And I think it means one thing, that we're not going back to fossil fuel. And I think that's the certainty. But the rest is all very vague, which is good because we have the opportunity to shape that language. So I was also feeling very negative about transitioning, but now I'm thinking, okay, that's an opportunity for those of us that care about climate change to really just start saying it. We're transitioning. The more you say it, the more it becomes a reality. And we know it has loopholes, but we know that it's not going back. And I think that's the important thing. So yeah, just the power that we have now to help shape the narrative about what transitioning means.
And there's a follow-up, actually two follow-up questions to that. Number one, the issue of mining of critical minerals to lithium and things like that to go into our cell phones was in our batteries. Was any discussion of that related to the COP? And then also one person asked about, I want to make sure I get it right, the FFNT. Is that Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty? I don't know, Gina or anyone else wants to, were either of those things discussed at this COP?
Yeah, I'll just speak to the treaty very present in this COP. And as a matter of fact, some countries actually signed on during COP. One of them was Samoa, as many islands is facing extinction possibility. But one was Colombia. It's a fossil fuel producing country, and it signed on to that. And so it is getting traction for sure. Yeah. And I already forgot the first question, but maybe Gina will remember.
I
Or
think
Susanna, sorry.
no, for the
Mining of
mining.
critical. Yeah.
Mining. In quite a few of the events I attended, there were panelists from Africa, because there is now a new scramble for Africa, and it is for mining, of course, and drilling of fracking liquid natural gas. Since the Ukraine-Russia war started, there's a big scramble for Africa, and because there are resources there for minerals, for gas. And some countries already have signed contracts with European countries and of course China to get minerals and oil, and for us, quote unquote, green energy, safe energy for people. So people were talking about that, and even in the climate actions, those were things that they kept saying, like, don't gas Africa, and pay up for your pollution, So yes, those were addressed, but it will take time for people to take it seriously, I think.
I think it's fantastic that so many activists were present in civil society organizations. Where else can we come together for 2 weeks on this topic and press our policymakers? And I can't imagine them being as far as they are now without you and all the others being there. Lisa, I see you're dropping some things into the chat. Why don't you go ahead and introduce that?
Yes, I'm going to put 4 very specific things, and we'll follow up with an email if you don't have time to open your chat and copy paste. But there are many things we can do concretely. As Gina said, COP may be one moment, but it really is moments, throughout the year, and in order for these things to move forward. So the first thing I'm putting in is the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty. You can call on your city, your town, your school to sign that. Another that's so important is to call on the Biden administration to stop oil and gas expansion. And I will also put in there, there was a great alert that the Mercy action team put out in asking the Biden administration to follow through on their promises at COP. And finally, one note of hope again is this Forest Act that is being introduced. It's bicameral, bipartisan. It will be introduced in the first few weeks. We're going to be asking for signatures for a faith letter to support it. Once again, it will prohibit all for deforestation, which is an important aspect of preserving our planet and halting climate change. So those are some specific actions I'll paste here, but we will also follow up on them.
Wonderful. That's great. And so everyone, rest assured, you'll receive a follow-up email with the link to the slides and this recording, as well as these different documents that our speakers mentioned, and then also these things that were shared in the chat. So we'll send it all to you. And of course, you can hit reply and get right back to us if you have any additional questions. Well, we've reached the top of the hour, and I want to say thank you to our three presenters. Thank you for going to COP28. Thank you for taking time to speak with us today about it. Blessings upon you to keep up the good work, and we hope to hear from you again next year after COP29. Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.